He is so kind of a guy that is so happy, and you're next to him and you just feel like everything is gonna be okay. He's just so happy to be playing music. There's no hurry in life. You know, he falls asleep everywhere, here and there. He wakes up slowly. In Mali, I guess the pace of life is very different. I remember the singer in his trio, Awa, her daughter got married. So we asked, oh, was the wedding big? And he said, he thought for a while, and he said, yeah, they killed 2 cows, so it was a very big wedding. It's completely different way of living, I think. Very, very slow. He does have a phone, so maybe it does. But I think it should have the feel of you're never in a hurry, that you're just kind of hanging out and you decide to jam, and it's kind of very laid back. And in the accompaniment, you should never feel like our Western sense of phrasing. It should be totally chilled out.
It was so great working with Lassana. Lassana was kind of like this. You heard this sound and you couldn't figure out how he was doing because his hands, at the beginning of that, I remember his hands weren't moving. And all of a sudden I hear it and I hear this sound.
Because the way he plays is just so easy.
Exactly.
And if you, that's the
hard about it.
Yeah. Because when you watch him play, he literally it's so natural for me. It's like one gesture, although it's separate notes. And we want to create that kind of same gesture. Yeah, so that I don't really hear bow changes, but it's absolutely just like one thing. Yeah, like that. Yeah, like that, exactly.
What's interesting though is kind of if you just hear him play the balafon and you hear him play some of the melodies from the work that he wrote down and wrote for us, you kind of you see the stick hitting. And it was very interesting working with the groups because a lot of them interpret it, it's something that you would call off the string in violin playing. It's a shorter stroke. But we had the fortune of playing the premiere of Lassana's work with Lassana in Abu Dhabi. And what was really clear is that he was striking it, but what happened after he did the initial hit is there's this ring. And it's really the ring, which is kind of more what you hear rather than the strike. And so what we did for the interpretation, and we talked to him in great length about this, is a lot of the strokes were more what you would call on the violin on the string.
Maybe try instead of off the string, maybe a tiny bit longer, and try. Yeah, and varying the length as you. Yeah. Ta-dum and da-dum da-da-dum ta-dum.
That was so much better. When you use your bow, it's so nice. If you place it, it sounds square.
Yeah.
It sounds nervous.
Yeah.
But if you just let your bow go, it's really nice.
Dee da dee da dee da rather than ba 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 ba, and it just turned it into more of his world and more of the balafon world.
The strings can be longer and have a more sense of a lyricism, so you can slur a lot more and play longer notes than what you think the balafon is doing. From a viola standpoint or from a string standpoint, whenever you have a long note, you get a good sound. Mm-hmm. Don't be shy. Bring out the sound that you can get. Like even a da 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 da, that is, you're establishing this is a viola and this is a good sound. I have a great vibrato. You blah blah blah, and then when it gets faster, of course, it's virtuosic.
Along that line, I would say, I think it would be helpful to add a lot more slurs. Because of nature of it's so different from percussive instrument. In order to create that kind of long lines, I think it'd be very helpful to, like for example at 84, you know how it's just the one long descending scale? Like if you do da 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 da, it just slur all 6 of them. Try it.
Yeah.
For Lassana's piece and a lot of the pieces in the score, we decided we didn't want to force upon other groups using our bowings, and especially our fingerings. You know, that's a very personal thing.
It's very interesting because we each edited our own movements, you know, and I was, being a librarian, I'm very attuned to what should be there on the page to make things musically and make it easier. Sunny was a different story, you know. She thought that the player should have that, she wanted to have the bare notes there and not much articulation or nuance, and let them come up with that. And which I think is admirable, but one has to understand that when you take it, you can't just play everything separately. You have the ability to slur if you want, etc.
I was for not putting any slurs, so that you can add and take out as many slurs as you can. And maybe there was a mistake. I'm wondering, because when you look at this, do you feel like, oh, since there are no slurs, I have to play everything separate bows?
I think eventually we've been sort of adding a little bit.
You've been, okay, that's good to know. So my solo movement is about Sunjata's mother talking about Sunjata. And Sunjata, if you don't know yet, is the person who built the Mali kingdom. And it's in A minor, it's very tender, and in a way I find it very nostalgic and tender, maybe a little bit of sadness. So I have my own story of what she's talking about. I can't share, I don't. Sometimes when I have problem trying to figure out the phrasing, I pluck my cello. To me, that gives me a better idea of how I would play as a balafon. So I sometimes, because when you pluck the resonance, you don't have to do so much worry about what am I going to do with the bow, but the resonance from the plucking kind of takes care of how the phrase would be. Do you want to try that, just like by yourself? Da, da, da. I mean, just from the beginning. So you really try to phrase with the plucking.
Many times there is an ostinato and a groove that's set up. And that is very important, that it's very rhythmic and yet not in the way of the solo, but it should follow the phrasing of the solo, and that's very, very important to do. In particular, I was just working on the cello movement, the third movement, with a lovely group this morning. And it was really very good because you have to have a really good balance between the ostinato to make sure that all the parts are working correctly and there's not a hiccup in it. And when that happens, it's an easy gait, and then the melody just falls into place in that.
You're kind of going in and out, and it's very easy to kind of think that the whole piece is a solo. In a sense it is, you know, you're kind of out there, but there are parts of it where you're kind of in the groove with everybody else. And I like that image, that you're emerging and then kind of going back in.
Rhythm is, I think, the most important element in music for me. And I think for a group who's wanting to start a career together, that's something that they must have in common, that they have the same sense of pulse. To me, that's so much more important than having same kind of style or, you know, similar way of tone or anything like that. It's the pulse that's the most important. That you phrase like that, with ease, but you never lose the integrity of. It's not like Chopin. With Chopin, I think we would go ahead more rubato, but this is kind of absolutely just at ease, like that. And on top of that, you create these arches of phrase.
And I'm listening to it, I'm kind of bouncing and I'm doing this. And really, when you think about African music, you know, there's that joy in it, obviously, and there is the bounce, but the reason you want to bounce is because you're being mesmerized. It's like a meditation a little bit. You know, people, they go on, a piece like this would go on for 2 hours, you know, and you'd get into a state. It wants to put you in a state. You know, the drumming, African drumming, it's putting your mind in a different state a little bit. And once you're jumping like this, that's different than being kind of glassy-eyed and being in a state. And so I like da-dum, beam, ba-dum, beam, ba-da-da-da-dum, dee-dum. I like not too much inflection on it, and I like being like this, that I'm being mesmerized in this. And nothing is necessarily jumping out, because once something jumps out, da-dum, beam, ba-dum, beam, da-dum, you go like this, and you're not meditating then.
And again, having grown up in Africa, I often see, when I'm driving by the road, I often see African women carrying huge, really heavy things on their head, bare feet, and they have to walk miles and miles like that. It's very, very hard life there for a lot of people. And how they survive that is through music and dancing, that they can forget about how hard it is, and they have a rhythm and pulse that gets them going. And it's incredible. I was actually telling this story to some of the groups that the power often goes out in my neighborhood where my parents live, because they live in the countryside. And the first thing you hear from miles away is people just start singing. That's the first thing that happens when power goes out. People don't complain and, oh my gosh, what time are we gonna get things done? It's like people like, oh, whatever, we'll just sing and dance till the power comes on. And the kind of rhythm and the melody they have, harmonies they create, it's so complex if we had to write it down in Western notation. But it's just, they grow up dancing to it and singing to it. It's just in their whole being. And I think for us who didn't quite grow up that way, it's very important to try to understand that.
Lassana is he's an incredible virtuoso of his instrument. And there's a little bit, you want to have a little bit of this in your solos.
Open up. Even like in the beginning, you know, John would just not play da-da, he'd go da-da-da-da, you know. He's so dramatic, you know.
You want to show people, like when you see Lassana play, when he does one of his solos, you know, he's Mr. Virtuoso. He's Mr. Virtuoso. He's showing all of the things that he can do virtuosically. And there's a little bit of that element, like in the big run, in the middle one.
The inspiration of Lassana's playing is one thing to do. But I also think to translate a musical, an original tape to the string instruments is another.
But, you know, composers and musicians have been doing this forever. And the idea that you hear something on one instrument and then you try to make that sound on another instrument is essential to instrumental music. And what I'm discovering is how thrilling it is to be able to use your imagination and mold sounds that you've never made before and try to find a way to do them on your instrument. And when your instrument is the string quartet, the palette is huge.